Hey everybody, it's Nick from Hotspawn, and I am back with another slightly unusual interview, an interview that I've been given the chance to do while here at MSI. I'm here with none other than Riot Phroxzon, who I'm sure everybody has seen in a million dev updates or who have been scouring his feed for patch notes. I know I have, when Yorick was repeatedly showing up in the patch notes, so you know, we appreciate the previews. But we're here to talk about the latest addition to the League of Legends roster, Yunara, because I'm really interested in AD is a very specific, very specific role that has, in a lot of ways, it feels like a lot of its basic niches filled. So when approaching a new ADC, there's I've just got some questions about that. So the first one is, where does Yunara start? Because I know back when there used to be like the Developing Champions podcast, you know, it can be as simple as when Camille came out. I'm forgetting the name of the designer, but they were like, I want to make Batman.
Jag.
I want, I want Batman to be slinging all over Summoner's Rift, and then I'll figure out how to back engineer that into like a play experience. So what was the first seed that eventually became Yunara?
Yeah, Yunara was definitely turned to basics for us. So I would say it was more of an audience-led kind of design as opposed to any particular gameplay idea that was coming out of the gate. So, you know, you would compare that to something like Zeri, for example, which was, hey, we want to make a AD carry that has recastable auto attack, basically, like Ezreal Q is the auto attack replacement. Yunara was definitely more about delivering an ADC that traditional auto attack oriented players would want. So the last three that we'd released were Samira, Smolder, and I forgot who the other one was. Yeah, Nila. Seems like at the right time. So they're very like non-traditional bot carries, in the sense that like they're either spellcaster oriented or just like straight up kill you, and less of that type of traditional attack pattern. And Aphelios was our most recent one, and that was 2019 or so. And so he's not even
and he's
traditional,
very different in a lot of ways.
Exactly. And so we really wanted to deliver an experience that traditionally attacking AD carry players would really resonate with. And so that was where we started, and we also wanted to make sure that she was pretty simple. And so we wanted to deliver something that was both simple and traditional.
So low floor, high ceiling, which is sort of like what I think of when I think of like, you know, Vayne-like champions, right? They tell you, their kit tells you exactly what they want to do. The difficulty is accomplishing that in a League of Legends game over and over and over.
Yeah, totally.
So you had this idea. She's not a typical AD design-wise at all. You know, we've got like Aphelios and Ashe and Xayah. She is throwing prayer beads, which is not necessarily like a place that my mind would go for an AD carry. And she has this very unique aesthetic, right? She's associated with the spirit realm, and she's got all this stuff going on with Spirit Blossom. When did those two ideas converge? Because certainly when I think of like traditional AD carry, I think of a much more like almost vanilla, like fantasy experience, you know, Vayne, Ashe, you know, the kind of like Legolas vibe. But she's very different and looks very different. When did those sort of come together? Because that really interests me.
Yeah, so during the DNA process, which is design, narrative, and art all kind of ideating together, we wanted to kind of find a way to reflect some of that Ionian origin, and it was critically important also that as a marksman, the thing that she's using to attack you doesn't feel particularly magical. And so that's kind of a tough balance to strike when you're coming from Ionia, which is, you know, a little more magical than other regions, but also needing to be pretty physical. And so that's where we kind of landed on the idea of her being a martial artist and her being able to hit these prayer beads. And prayer beads was always a front runner during a lot of our weapon explorations. And there was evocative. Yeah, and there was one where she almost had a Kiana-esque level of connected beads around her.
Sure,
and they
like
were
the
like
full necklace.
Yeah, and it was like kind of just all around her entire body. But at some point during development, we decided that it would be better if the prayer beads were kind of like their own entity, but also like channeling the power of these Ionian spirit dragons. And so that was kind of when we decided that that direction was more of what we were looking for. Other directions that we explored were, you know, we had musical instruments that were using like sound or reverberation as that type of thing, but it didn't really feel very physical. And so the prayer beads became the obvious
blends
choice.
A little bit with like Sona, Seraphine kind of.
Totally. And her origin is that she's a shrine maiden, right? And that And so there was a lot of that type of spiritual, physical, spiritual, you know, in terms of like being focused and calm, but also physical in terms of needing to deliver that marksman fantasy.
Yeah.
And so this is where we ended up. I would say a lot of the design directions that utilized prayer beads more didn't quite fit the bar for what we needed for the simple gameplay. And so, you know, during the design process, we can often run into those situations where, you know, narrative, art, and design are all kind of like going together, like everyone's pushing forwards, but then, you know, one particular discipline might get blocked. They'd be like, I'm having a you know, brain fog on like artistic directions on which we can take this, or design might be like, oh, we had a major breakthrough, but that kind of like bricks some of the other directions that the other disciplines were going. And I think that that was some of how we ended up with the prayer beats not playing as pivotal of a role as we kind of would have wanted them to be
in terms of gameplay,
world.
but like when I think like Yunara, there was a cosplayer outside who had the prayer beats ready, and like those are a striking prop that like no other League champ has. And I think it's really good because, you know, as the Riot talks about all the time, the silhouette is king. Being able to tell who the champion is and the floating beads, like that's not something that we have on any other character. So I really like her design. Now, talking about her gameplay, she is a little weird in that, you know, we're talking about like, oh, traditional AD gameplay, you've got a speed boost that turns into a dash, you've got auto enhancements, your ult's essentially a steroid. Very classic, except that she has magic damage that incorporates with her crits, which is just like, with the exception of old Corki, for example, who would, you know, build crit and have mixed damage, this isn't something that we have a lot of. So what made you guys decide that like Yunara's the right place to bring in this magic, you know, off magic damage crit AD carry? Because I know a lot of the, you know, the fan reactions like, how do I itemize against this character? Now, none of us have played against her really, so I'm sure it won't be as bad. But yeah, so like, what made you guys decide to take this unusual angle at the same time that you're taking, as you're talking about, like a very traditional angle with a lot of her design, but then really going into left field on another one?
Yeah, so especially for champions that have kind of this traditional crit placement, they automatically have a pretty backloaded scaling profile in the sense that like 3 items, 4 items, 5 items, they tend to be very powerful.
Critting 100% of the time is a lot better than 25%.
And we wanted a way to essentially modulate how well she scales. And so, and also how target agnostic she is, because it can be difficult to itemize against a champion that does, you know, let's just say 50% magic and 50% physical, right? But that was a kind of intentional property in this respect, where we can tune the passive up more if we need her to be more target agnostic, and tune it down less if we need her to be less target agnostic. And so that's mainly the purpose of it, and less about we wanted to present as a hybrid, because we know that, you know, hybrids are generally not going to be as resonant as, you know, if someone's playing Sivir and half her damage is magical, that just doesn't feel like your crit number is as big. Like there's a lot of trade-offs that come with that, and so we want it to be a lever that's in place for us to get the gameplay output that we want, but not necessarily carry a lot of like thematic value or any of that other type
So
of thing.
for the people like me who are going to be spamming out Yunara, like as soon as she's out, I'm going home and I'm back to bot lane. Farewell jungle, at least for the time being. What sort of team comps does she fit into, and do you have any like spicy lanes from the playtest? Because I've been thinking she looks pretty good with like Braum and those peel disengage supports, who can give her the space to put out what looks like a lot of damage if she's untouched.
Yunara is pretty weak in the early game. It's her attack pattern is one that, you know, you have to be attacking the wave, but you don't, to stack up your Q, but you don't really have much outside of your W to really, you know, have space control or lane control. And so typically what we've seen is champions that can allow her to bridge that early game and let her get to level 6 where she feels like she's actually strong and she can, you know, open up with a R and kind of actually just like win a skirmish. Those are the types of champions that we've seen succeed. And other champions where you also have a weak laning phase, and so the bot lane is basically completely ineffective for the early parts of the game, have been much weaker. In terms of like team compositions, she's functioned pretty well in most of the places that you would slot a traditional crit champion. We would say that we're targeting kind of about the average for scaling for crit champions. Like we have had situations where she's been the best crit scaler in the game internally, and that didn't necessarily feel quite right. But at the same time, being too weak on scaling when we're presenting a character that looks like it kind of hyperscales, or at least scales pretty well, would be disappointing for the player base. So we're trying to strike that balance of, about average scaling. The one trick I would say about mastering Yunara that, I don't do very well right now is using her auto attack resets very well. And so
her Q is an auto attack reset.
Her Q is an auto attack reset, and her ultimate is an auto attack reset because it turns on Q.
That's two auto attack resets on an AD, so you could get triple autoed in very short succession.
You could, but it wouldn't. It
optimal,
it would only be one, because you wouldn't be able to get an auto reset off the Q and off the R because it's already active.
Yeah.
So that is something that because we felt like the top end mastery of Yunara was, we didn't want to position it super high. We felt like it was important to have some amount of skill expression in there.
Sort of that baseline crit AD carry experience.
Yeah, and so that type of like auto W with Siva or auto Q with Yunara or auto ult with Yunara is something that we felt like was appropriate to give to her, even though it might result in a lot of burst damage in some instances. So that is, I would say, one of the most key tricks. And the other one is using, say, for example, like RW flash and things like that, because you can do that on this character.
Awesome. The last question is just something I'm really interested in. I am a League lore nerd. I love these seasons. I love the way that like the map changes, part of the world gets brought to life, and I've always said that in League, the only way really that the world gets brought to you is the voice lines and the character's appearance, and then the rest of the gameplay is just like kind of like a what if scenario. What if these characters fought? What would happen? And so I've been really excited. Obviously, Mel was cool, but she's an Arcane, so like it's not the same introduction.
Yeah.
What has the experience been like for you guys being able to build out these really cool sort of debut moments for these champions where they tie into the mini games and the comics and everything else that's going on? Because this feels like the most cohesive champion launch to me in a long time, and that I think a lot of that comes to the fact that we're already sitting in the theme, we're being introduced to these things. I'm thinking about Xin Zhao's story, and like, the motion comics, I love them. I read them multiple times whenever they come out. But yeah, just how are you guys finding that, being able to build out a much larger thematic experience around the champion for their debut? Because before it would just be like, if we were lucky, we'd get like the profiles changing on the champion page when Jin came out and he was killing people and stuff like that. But yeah, what has it been like for you guys?
It's super awesome. I would say that's one of the major benefits of the seasonal model, just that all of the different teams and kind of like disciplines within the ecosystem can feel like we're all working together towards the same thing.
Like a giant DNA team.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it feels like, at times it's very challenging in terms of navigating. Imagine the DNA process that I just talked about and having that multiplied by like 10 different teams where it's just like, oh, well, we actually decided to pivot Yunara's weapon, and then marketing's like, no, but we were designing this thing with the, like the prayer beads or something, like those types of decisions become a lot more impactful. But when we do it right, the payoff just feels so much more integrated and cohesive and resonant. And so it's something that we've found a lot of success with in this season in particular. And so just getting to tie the story, the gameplay, the VO, the narrative, all of the artistic representations and all of the gameplay and all of that together just feels very gratifying. And it's honestly like very hype for the dev team, right? Like that's another thing that I think is very underrated in terms of its benefit, which is just like the morale of the dev team. Like you feel like you're building something together.
Making the art.
Yeah, and it's like, oh wow, I really love how you did this thing to my champion in the publishing campaign, or it's getting featured in an esports thing, or like that type of stuff just feels very rewarding as a dev, I would say.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I mean, and it applies as far as much. I'm wearing a Season 2 Spirit Blossom bomber jacket, and it's like my favorite piece of clothing that I've bought in a hot minute.
Let's go.
So that's great. Thank you so much for the time, Phroxzon. Everybody, the man who personally ensures that the champion you like is nerfed. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks so much for the conversation.